I could smell the stench of death before I even stepped out of my truck. In its glory days, this place was the jewel of the neighborhood, the American dream personified, a sprawling 2-story, 3-bedroom house only a few miles from the beach. Looking at it now, I'd hardly have guessed that anyone lived there at all. It was an eyesore. Even from the driveway, clusters of discarded papers and trash of all variety, as far as you could see. None of the items seemed to have any rhyme or reason, but that was to be expected given who the owner was. Working for the city for the past 10 years, the name Miguel Tindalos has come up at least a few times a year. He was a foreigner, had inherited a large sum of money from family, and bought out most of the property in the surrounding neighborhood. At first, most thought it was a sign of new blood in the area, but it was quickly becoming apparent that Miguel was going to be more of a problem than a solution. He was a hoarder, plain and simple. Everything he bought, he kept. And while he spent a lot of money, most of the items he owned were now sitting in his front yard collecting dust. And I knew the inside was no better. And most of the surrounding community complained constantly about the animals, the smell, and the sheer amount of trash. But Miguel had deep pockets. He could pay any fine that was thrown his way. Some threatened to get the city to condemn his house, but that fell through too. And as a result, the hoarder's house had become a fixture in the end of the lane for as long as I could remember. As I stepped out to approach the house, I tried to recall the last time I had actually seen Mr. Tindalos in person. It had been a while. Everyone knew he was a hermit. The clutter kept him hidden from the world. I always wondered what it was he felt like he was hiding from. And I guess now that I was here to assess the mess and find his body, it's time I found out. How long had he been dead in his filth before anyone thought to check on him? I knew he had no family, no friends, save maybe a few debt collectors. His mailbox was stuffed full, possibly with months of suspension notices and other bills. He could have been rotting away for a year, and nobody would be the wiser. It made me dread what was to come. As much as I wanted to delay the inevitable, I knew that getting this over with would be for the best, so I got my hazmat suit on, and I headed for the door. The air felt stiff, despite the season. Not a soul was nearby, and most of the other people had moved away to get as far from Miguel as possible. He'd driven down the property values, and if it hadn't been for the recent storm, I doubt anyone would have realized that the house was still here at all. The water washed away so much of his trash down the road, it was imperative that the city clean it, just for the safety and well-being of others in the area. But now, standing here, about to pry the door open to a living cesspool, I realized that I was likely going to walk into something far worse than I had imagined. As soon as the hinge unlocked, more trash of every sort fell out. There were wrappers, bottles, discarded food, and all sorts of miscellaneous stuff. It was difficult to even be sure what was worth salvaging, if anything. And I had hardly even stepped inside. I had to crawl over the first layer of trash to get into the front room, where more garbage and clutter of every sort packed out the entire space. There were boxes dated as though meant for a move, perhaps from when Miguel first moved in that had never been opened, crammed into corners. There were also bags of trash tossed aside to any available space that wasn't already piled high. And besides the usual trash, I saw milk jugs that had either fermented or been filled with urine, a clear indication that water hadn't been used in this house for some time. And that didn't even account for the rat feces and other droppings I could spot everywhere. It was horrifying to behold, the sheer carnage and chaos of how this man had lived. I had to push aside cobwebs and trash to crawl through the kitchen. The roof above me was clearly sagging from the weight of more junk in the rooms above. Every crevice of this place was a pigsty, every alcove taken over by more items. Some were antiques that clearly could have been sold, or canned food that could have gone to charity. The sheer amount of droppings and mold made it obvious that there wouldn't be much here to save. I made it to the kitchen and inspected the food, and in every suit, I could tell that the majority of it had gone bad. Rotting or molding fruit was stuffed into every part of the fridge, and dirty dishes piled high on the counters. Then I heard a rustling noise from somewhere above me, and felt my heart skip a beat. Could it be that somehow Mr. Tindalos had managed to remain alive? It seemed like an impossibility, but I had to be sure, so I closed the fridge back and made for the stairs. There was even more debris here, along with the larger feces droppings that looked like they'd either came from a large animal or from Miguel himself, and it made me want to vomit as I slowly climbed the stairs and called out his name. I didn't want to hold out hope that he was still alive, but if so, I had to at least try to help him out of this nightmare. As I stood at the top of the stairs, my eyes drifted towards the bathroom. I wasn't sure I was ready to face how nasty that was, but I knew I needed to check it, since it was the closest. Pushing the door open, I was fixated on the pile of human feces that was dredging from the toilet, along with a massive amount of what looked like shredded skin on the floor. It was nauseating and disturbing to think that any human would subject himself to this. At the back of the door on a hook, I saw what looked like some kind of costume, wrinkled, completely yellowed by mold and time itself. In a previous age, it might have even looked like a bodysuit of some kind, I thought, as I pulled back the shower curtain to see more caked mold and feces covering every part of the tub. There was also blood and what looked like a woman's head fused the shower, where the water would pour out of her eye sockets. I quickly backed out and slammed the door, my own head dizzy as I tried to come to terms with what I had just seen. This was beyond revolting. I had seen a lot of terrible things in my day, but nothing like this. I wanted to leave immediately, call the cops, maybe even throw up. Miguel Tindalos was some kind of serial killer. It all made sense to me as I stumbled down the hall, trying to not trip over the other debris. All the reports of people going missing in the area, they had become part of his horde, and I was now looking at the shredded and flaky skin on the floor and wondering how many victims were actually buried under this filth. And somehow, instead of finding an out, I was in a different room. I was immediately confused. Had this room been here before? The hallways and clutter made this house feel confusing and labyrinthian. As the door pushed open, I saw my utter bewilderment that inside it was pristine, as though a line had been drawn in the sand to distinguish that this area was different than the rest of the house. As my vision recovered, I realized there were candles neatly arranged around a draped piece of furniture at the end of the room. The setup reminded me of how an altar might appear in a shrine, unsettling me even more. I felt compelled to pull back the cloth and see what was underneath. It was a large vanity mirror, the kind of which might normally hang in a master bedroom. Instead of being made of normal clear glass, the material of the mirror was the darkest shade I'd ever seen. I tried to think of the name for it. I think the closest description was Vanta Black. It was uncanny to behold. As long as you might stare into it, nothing would ever reflect back. I reached out instinctively to touch the mirror, mesmerized by its presence. And then I felt a chill in the air. Had the candles been lit when I entered the room? The mirror seemed to move of its own accord, and then I realized it was the glass sliding out of the frame, the way that a sludge might from a broken pipe. It was a living slime that was moving towards me, and from the sludge, I saw what looked like fingers protruding. I fell backwards out of the room and towards the hallway, pushing clutter aside. I think I literally shouted, "What the fuck?" as I began to run. But the horde was all around me. I knew that a creature with no bones would find it far easier to traverse this area than me. I could hardly catch my breath, and then in my shattered brain, I thought of the window in the bathroom. I could climb out. I pushed open the door, climbing atop the feces-covered toilet as my heart pounded faster. The slime was right behind me. It swirled and moved towards the tub, as though attracted by the body parts. I couldn't help but be paralyzed in fear as I pushed the window latch to the roof. open and watch the slime consume the costume on the wall. As it took the form of the bodysuit, I realized the entire thing was in fact made of peeled, wrinkled human skin, worn out from age and multiple wear and tear. It was mortifying to watch, but I couldn't look away as it picked up the severed head, pulsing and oozing in and out of the empty sockets and holes as it seemed to take it on as a mask in this misshapen body. And then I heard the ghastly scream. It sounded like it was trying to imitate the woman that it had taken as a body as I pushed onto the roof. I'm not quite sure. I couldn't stop from running as I fell out onto the hard tiling and looked towards the backyard. There looked to be literally hundreds of bags of trash filled with leftover food, discarded items, and possibly even more disgusting stuff, but I didn't care. My life depended on the fact that I needed to keep moving. I leapt into the trash below and swam through the putrid clutter, pushing my way to safety to avoid the ungodly creature that followed. I made it to my truck and I drove away as fast as I could, not even bothering to stop and unzip the hazmat suit. When I stopped, I took a few breaths to clear my head. The house needed to be demolished immediately, destroyed before any other souls became a part of that clusterfuck. I had a spare pack of cigarettes in the truck and a gallon of gas. I turned around, I forced myself to return, hands gripping the wheel of my vehicle as I came up to the house. I got out and started to douse the trash with gasoline, determined to end this nightmare before anyone else had to come across it. I could hear the creature scream as I lit a cigarette and tossed it into the pile, shielding my eyes as the inferno began to rise. I felt the heat swarm around my body as I stepped away, my feet feeling heavy as I felt the flames lick my skin. Something sparked from the trash heap, colliding with my eyes, and I screamed, desperate to see again. I ran from the house. I called 911 as the fire kept consuming the horde. Later that day, I had to have emergency surgery. My eye was removed due to retinal scarring. I returned to the hoarder house the next day to be sure the inferno had done its job. But it felt like the trash heap had doubled in size, spread even further. As I looked at the desolate structure, I wondered to myself if part of me was now left behind in this place to become part of the horde. I've recommended to the city that we simply just leave the property alone. And I hope they listen. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I just wanted to tell you thank you so much for watching tonight's video, or listening to tonight's episode of the podcast. It really helps me out whenever you guys do things like listen or watch. And it really helps if you guys also subscribe to the podcast or subscribe to the YouTube channel, or do things like clicking the bell or clicking the like button. Tales from the Gas Station is back, in case you guys had missed out on that. Tales from the Gas Station Volume 1 and 2 were different audiobooks that I had done for Jack Townsend a couple of years ago, but in case you missed it at the end of last year, also Tales from the Gas Station Volume 3 is available now on Audible. You can check it out by looking for Tales from the Gas Station or searching for MrCreepyPasta on Audible, or, scroll down to the description and click the links there. And as always, I want to give a very special thank you to all of my supporters on Patreon. You guys are the ones who help me keep the lights on the house, as well as allow me to do things like commission brand new stories. In case you guys haven't noticed, we hit that tier. So, a very special thank you to Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Stricken, Chase Burnett, Deanna Kraus, G Weevil 3, Tristan Pelton, 1-800-Nightmare, Acid System, Aaron Stormcrow, Azurine Fox, Bobby Karman, Chris Lovins, Cryptic Nightmares, The Doctor, Daniel Polson, Dr. Stein and Mr. Happy, Eurogore, Freddy Krueger, Fried Chicken 12, Hades Nephew, InfernalOne, James Bruce, James Lowe, Jason VR Wilson, JimboTheHutt, Jordan Nels, Jordan Johnson, Caleb Dougal, Kiri the Sloth, Legit Quad Feed, Liam Newman, Lisa Cottrell, Marco Takes Dabs 420, Michael Scharbrough, Nico Kayo, Nina Smith, Prozac and Pancake Appreciation Society, Rafael Rodriguez, Robert White, S-Man, Sky Harbor, Snails Burnett, Talon Karlik, The Ginger Bros, Trace Miles, Tsuji Campbell, Tynannie, Unknown Nobody, Andre Garcia, Brianna Wright, Brian Ace, Caspian, Hogunkji, and Someone You Love. And also a very special thank you to everybody who's down there in the description down below. below. All you guys who are listed as Patreons and everybody who's even supporting for just $1, I really love and appreciate you guys. And if you want to join them, you can always head over to patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. Even $1 a month, honestly, it keeps the show going. So thank you guys so much. And to everyone out there, sweet dreams.